Hey all, so I wanted to make a quick video on just how to texture models, and yeah, here we go. So as you can see, we've got this, it's a particular type of airplane. It has UVs already set up for it. I didn't make anything for this video, but you can see there's stuff here. It's already got its UVs correct. So the next step to texture would be to add a material to all of the different surfaces. I won't do this for all of them, but I'll do it for, let's say, the windows first. So you select the model that you want to do that with, you right click and you assign new material, as I'm sure you all know. And because we actually use Arnold, we're not going to use like a Lambert, Phong, or Bling shader. We're going to use a Arnold or an AI standard surface shader. Turn it on, it comes over here, and you have all these different submenus that you can work with. Base is kind of like it's the base color. Whether it has a diffuse layer, or whether it has diffuse on it or not, whether it has a specular highlight, whether it takes transmission would be how transparent it is. Subsurfaces, like our skin and wax, have a subsurface as a quality to them, so that's basically it's kind of like a translucency that you can see a color underneath. Coat would be having a second level of specular, kind of like if you put a clear coat on nail polish or something like that. Sheen is for clothing. Emission is the light that it actually gives off. Anyways, because this is a window, I'm going to turn diffuse all the way down, and I'm going to turn transmission all the way up, almost. Let's say 0.9. And when you zoom in, you'll see that it's pretty much clear. And it's not totally clear, but that's because transmission is transparency, more or less. So next, say we want to do that to the body. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to assign a new material, and then I'm going to go back to Arnold's AI standard surface. And, oh, actually, something I should have did the first time was name this. So we're going to name this window MTL, MTL for material. We'll name this body MTL. So I'm going to focus on the body for the rest of this, and if you want to give it a particular texture, because I know people are working with wood and things like that, then it would make sense to go source something. Oh, by the way, when you want to know more in-depth details about what all of those different submenus are, if you look up Arnold's standard surface, you'll find a link which will take you here, which then you can go into base, you can go into all of these, and it basically explains exactly what it does, and it has all these great little images. So I would 100% say go find this and study it a little bit, because it's going to be really useful to know. But you need to find a texture for whatever it is that you want to texture. So if, say, we wanted the body of this to be wood, it doesn't really make sense to be wood, it should be some sort of paint, but wood makes sense for this application. No, let's do metal texture. Because I just need something that's uneven, is kind of what's going on, and ideally a texture will look like it doesn't have any lighting on it, which is a little difficult with metal. This looks even enough. You save this image, documents folder, my projects. I'm just using the default folder. Usually you should stick this in the source images folder, and we're going to name this metal base. So then when you have that saved, the issue that you're going to run into if you want to apply this to the UV map is that it doesn't tile. Like, that's the big one. So if you go into Photoshop and you create a new document, maybe we'll make it 2048 by 2048. That's a good size for UV maps, or it could be 4096, could be 1024, 512, could be 256, but those are getting a little bit outdated at this point. If I pull this in and I zoom into it, I'll rasterize the layer and trim. That makes it so that only that is left. If I want to see what the edges of this look like, then you go Other, you go Offset, and you just kind of pull this, let's say 800 by 800? I believe the top and bottom is like right here, but it does seem to be pretty seamless. Basically, I need to modify this texture so that you can't tell what's going on here. So you could use the spot heal brush, just make sure you don't get too close to the edge, because that will cause more issues, like it'll make it so that it'll not tile well in another place. This is working quite well for me. You can go further with this with your own textures. I'm just trying to get something done. Good enough. Okay, so now if I go back and offset again, now it's a seamless texture basically. This is an old way of doing this, and it's not ideal. I don't like that this is how it is, but it is. I'm also going to add a fill layer that's a solid color. We're just going to make this like a colored metal, so multiply orange. Yeah, we'll make it an orange anodized aluminum type metal. Now, we'll save this. TIFF is usually a good file type for this, so metal diffuse, because you want to make sure that you know it's a diffuse file. And I'm just going to leave the file as it is. Oh, actually, discard layers. There we go. So now when I bring this back in here, I can go into the hypershade, click on body material, and I'll click the checkerboard beside color, grab it from a file, and then we'll go metal diffuse, and that'll give us this texture, which is probably going to be too small. Yeah, so if you look at this, it should be bigger, or it makes this plane look very small compared to what it is. So I guess there's two ways you can do that. One would be that you go to UV editor, and you could just grab all of these. I guess UV, grab, scale them to be bigger, and you can kind of see in the background that it is changing the size of the texture. So like this is starting to look like the right size, but that also kind of screws with UV space. So I am not a fan of that approach. So the way I'll show you how to do it would be to go back into the hypershade. Don't need it full screen. Click on body material, make all the inputs and output connections visible. Zoom in here, and this is the part that lets you scale your textures. So you can make this 5, and you can make this 5, and then suddenly it scales the texture for you, but you don't have to scale the UV, so it's a better way to go about it. So now we have a diffuse texture. We can now use the same file actually to create a bump map and a specular map. So I'm going to group these by selecting the ones I want to group, going Control G. I'll delete this. We'll name this diffuse, and then you can Control J, and that'll copy the group. So now I've got a duplicate of it. We'll call this one specular. Then we'll go, and maybe for this one, metal can be shiny, but basically the closer to white it is, the higher the specular value will be, and the closer to black, the more matte it will appear. So for this, we want it to be like kind of shiny, but not this shiny. So I'm just going to make a levels node, get rid of this color fill because specular is a black and white value. From here, just adjust it, so maybe it's here, but we also want to just reduce the contrast a little bit. Yeah, let's just say this is going to be our specular. So then I'll go save, metal, specular. We'll save this as a TIFF again. Discard layers. So then I'll click on the body material again. And it's tricky because there's both a specular weight and a specular color option. For this, I want it to be specular weight. You'll want to go take a look at the documentation for this to see what specular color is. When it comes down to it, technically my metal diffuse should be a specular color, not a base color. But that's just because it's a metal. I'll drop the specular file into here, and I'll go back here. I'll change the UVs to 5 again. Then when I go, let's say I make a Arnold light, we'll make it a sky dome just because that's like all encompassing. And then we'll go into render. You can see that this is a fairly high specular color file. I'm just curious. Luminance. When you take a file or any sort of color and you plug it through luminance, it converts RGB to black and white. So that is correct. It just automatically sticks it out of the alpha, which is not correct, unfortunately. That's important to note. So then we'll just do one last one, which should be a bump map, which, again, I'm going to Control J to copy this. We'll call it a bump. And I might actually just basically using the same controls. I'll pull this all the way back here. We want to make the most contrast possible. Or rather, the more contrast you make, the deeper the bump will appear to be. So then you go save as once more, and we're gonna go metal bump. And I'll discard layers. You can also save these as PNGs, that's not a big deal. Go back into Maya, and you put it in geometry, and then bump mapping. Normal maps are a lot harder to place on an Arnold shader. So now I'll add the metal bump file. When you look up close, you can see that there is a bump map applied. But if you look at this, it's just going to be too intense. I also have to repeat this 5 times once more. And then in this bump 2D1, I can change the bump depth to, maybe in this case I'll just go to 0.1 because that's going to be a lot more reasonable. And it even looks more reasonable in this hardware shader. So now if I go to render this, you almost can't even tell that the bump is there. And that's maybe for the best. It's not really supposed to be something that you can see really intensely in this case. But to show that it's there, maybe let's bump this up to 1. Because ultimately a bump is just something that tricks the light to make you think that the 2D surface has shadows and depth and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't actually modify the geometry. You need a displacement map for that kind of thing, which we'll cover in another lecture. Anyways, if you need to apply this texture to specific parts of a UV and not the whole thing, then you need to export a UV snapshot. To do that, you will go UV. Yeah, you have to be in the UV editor for this. I keep forgetting. Then you go Tool or Image, and you do a UV Snapshot. UV Snapshot, you can choose what you want to export it as. A PNG probably works really well. You can make this the same size as your Photoshop document. So, and you can choose edge color. So maybe in this case, set of default images, just because it's part of the source images, I'll put it here. Body, UV, and that'll work. You have to actually have something selected for it. So apply and close, and that'll export what you see here into a file. You can go and open this up in here, and it'll overlay itself. You can't really see it because it's actually really, really light. So if I put it, take it out of this bump group, and I create a fill layer, solid color, yeah, purple will work just fine. This is like an archaic way of doing all of this. Substance Painter makes this whole thing redundant and a lot faster. If you needed to control the density of this material, like this metal, then something you could do with the layer selected that has it, go Edit, Define Pattern, and we can say this is metal. Oh, metal. Then instead of using this, you could actually create a layer, a new fill layer, and make it a pattern. And then you could have it be this instead, which is cool because it lets you control the scaling within Photoshop. Again, this is kind of redundant, but it's good to know, I suppose. So because this layer has a mask, you could go with a paintbrush and you could paint with white and it'll make the texture visible, or black and it'll show what is underneath. So in that way you could choose where on the UV you don't want this to be and you can place it there. Preferably with a brush that is got a proper hard edge. So this is kind of like the annoying way of doing all this. If you go to Substance Source, they have 84 free assets that you can choose from. And what you see is not necessarily all you can get. So for some reason, a lot of these are just like something you'd use with an alpha channel, which is kind of cool, but not what we're looking for. Can I do... There we go. So this will just give us the... If you search for SBS, this will give you just the ones that you want. For example, this old Japanese stone pavers can actually be probably any kind of brick that you want. You don't have to worry about it having the limitation of just being what you see here. Same with this Japanese porcelain. Again, it's literally like it's a texture for porcelain. It'll give you lots of options for what you can do with it. And even without Substance Painter or Substance Designer, you can use these. So if you download any of these, spotted paint, moss balls, this is a type of wood, so you could actually give this a color, likely. It's black, but you can, yeah, they changed it to white. Do they have, yeah, they just did white and black. Iridescent car paint, American walnut. Like, you should be able to get what you need from here, honestly, and just modify it. It'll create all of the different textures that you need. So I myself have quite a few. I'm just going to go pull one up. Let's choose a metal, a milled metal pattern. So to use these, you have to go Google Substance Source and install it. Substance Player is what I have open right now, which you'll see in a second. So this will let you tweak all these textures on the fly. You can just download something that somebody else made and use it. So in this case, it created this. It has like a nice little viewport for you to see what it looks like. And it actually even has all of these different things that you can play with for, say, you want to change the color. Maybe you want to change the type of pattern in it. You want to choose how it's rotated. By default, it's a 512 by 512 size. But for this case, maybe you want the 2048, which, as you can tell, like it changes the quality of things. So when you get down close, you can kind of in real time see what the quality is going to look like if you export that way. You can invert the pattern. You could also just do weird things like make them really saturated. And then you could also do like a hue shift. Like, so you have some odd choices for things that you can do. I'm just going to set this back to default. And then I'll export as bitmap. Here, you have to choose where you're going to export. Usually, I have a folder with all of my different materials in it. So we'll say this is a diamond plate milled metal. So I'll select that folder. I'll choose a format, PNG. Done. All of these different textures were made in like 5 seconds. So base color is just a normal gray. It has no diffuse because it doesn't use a diffuse layer. This is the glossiness, height. It's metallic is white because the whole thing is totally metallic. This is the normal map, which is used for tricking the light. Roughness and glossiness are usually the opposite of each other, specular level. You could take that into the hypershade here and also replace, maybe we switch out metal diffuse, materials, metal, diamond plate metal. So yeah, we can add the base color here. Then we could add the specular. We'll change bump to height map here, which would basically be the same thing. So now you've got this texture going through the whole thing. And because I just applied this in Maya versus Substance Painter, you don't have the same control over seams and stuff. You might still have to take those files that were created in Substance Player and move them around in Photoshop to get them to match the UVs. That's it. Good luck.